Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today for this important outreach engagement process. So why are we here today? What are we here to talk about? So the city of Glendale is thinking of adopting a number of REACH codes based around building electrification, photovoltaics, and electric vehicle charging. We engaged Rincon consultants to help us on this journey, and they have gone out and they've looked at best practices, and we've had a lot of discussions internally with the city. And I think what we're coming down to is 3 REACH codes, which we think are fairly adventurous and fairly aggressive, and be a good pathway, a good beginning for the city as it looks to decarbonize both its built environment and also look to decarbonize our transport environment. So today, what today is about is the opportunity to learn about the REACH codes, but it's also the opportunity to get your feedback, to hear your thoughts, to answer some of the questions that you may have on the proposed REACH codes. We have a little timeline of events. So we have this meeting, which is the second of our stakeholder group meetings. We had the Sustainability Commission from the beginning of this week, or beginning of last week, I think it was. And then we're going to go to City Council next week. So all your comments, all your thoughts are going to be part of the information that is going to be passed on to City Council. So City Council at the September 13th meeting will be providing staff direction of how to proceed with the REACH codes. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Eric and Ryan from Rincon Consultants, who have been really helping us on this project and they're doing an amazing job. And we're going to let them present their findings. And then, as I said, we'll have questions and answers after that.
Thanks, David. Yeah, my name is Ryan Gardner. I'm the Climate Action Program Manager with Rincon Consultants, and I'm going to run us through a presentation. Try not to keep it too long, but then we'll open up the chat for questions and we'll run through those and have a little bit of dialogue following the presentation. Right. So just to kind of set the stage, there are 3 proposed new REACH codes that would apply to new construction. That is an all-electric new construction REACH code that would apply to all new construction with an infeasibility waiver. This also includes standalone ADUs or accessory dwelling units. And this is looking at all construction not using a natural gas hookup, so only electricity for the fuel source, leveraging heat pumps for water heating and air and space heating and cooling, and induction stoves, things like that. We'll get into some more of the technologies there. The second is a expanded solar photovoltaic or PV REACH code that affects non-residential and high-rise multifamily systems. And this is looking at going from just being solar ready for these buildings to having either 50% of the building's energy consumption offset by solar or 50% of the available roof space, whichever is less. And then thirdly, we're looking at also increasing electric vehicle charging capacity, consistent with CALGREEN voluntary tier 2 standards. This would roughly double the amount of EV charging available in multifamily and non-residential building types. So when we're talking about REACH codes, these are local amendments to the state building code that go beyond the statewide base levels of energy efficiency. And the building code is designed to allow jurisdictions to do this. The CALGREEN Tier 1 and Tier 2 are examples of that, that you can just opt into as a city. And these codes are being updated and adopted by cities up until January 1st is when they will become active, and new buildings will have to comply with that. And that's for the base code and the REACH codes. And just a reminder that we're only talking about new construction today. So we're not talking about existing buildings at all. This will only be for new construction being done from the ground up. So just to add a little bit of background on why these REACH codes are being put in place, beyond the cost effectiveness benefits, indoor air quality, outdoor air quality, we're also looking at reducing greenhouse gas emissions and consistent with the state. And in the city of Glendale, this is based on 2004 data. So it's a little on the old side at this point, but the city will be updating an inventory in the short term. We're looking at a vast majority of emissions coming from either transportation at 44% or building energy use at 52%. And in buildings, in 2004, a large part did come from electricity consumption. But this is decreasing year over year due to more renewable electricity. And because of SB 100, which is the renewable portfolio standard, this portion of this pie will go to zero by 2045 by law. And that leaves this building gas usage, which is becoming a bigger and bigger portion of the pie. So those are really two areas, and with the solar, three areas where we're focusing on targeting greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And together, these three REACH codes really make a new type of building, one where we have solar, maybe battery backup, and then all the things in our home and our offices and other buildings are run on electricity. Our cars can be charged, and kind of a new holistic approach to building a building that has a lot more energy on site, and maybe even relies on the grid a little bit less. And we get benefits like potentially higher grid stability from the solar and the batteries. We get internal or indoor air quality benefits. We get external outdoor air quality benefits. So overall, just a healthier building that's more cost effective and provides these greenhouse gas reduction benefits. On the building side, when we talk about electrification, we're really talking about heat pumps as the preferred electricity use. These pieces of equipment are highly efficient, 300%, 400%, 500% efficient, compared to natural gas alternatives, which can never be beyond 100%, and really they're more in the range of 90–95% efficient. So we get really big efficiency gains. And heat pumps are also interesting that one unit can be run forward to provide heating or backwards to provide cooling. So there's cost savings there, because you don't have to install both an air conditioner and a furnace. Just one air source heat pump will do that work. And then on the cooking side, we're really talking about induction cooking. And this is a big upgrade from the resistance heating you might think of, where there's kind of a metal ring on the countertop that you put your pot on, it heats up. They can be really slow to react, especially compared to gas. But these induction stoves use a magnetic field and are really responsive, really easy to control, and in line with gas cooking. And then on the clothes drying side, replacing our natural gas clothes dryer with either an electric one or a heat pump to round out our all-electric building. So getting into some more specifics about the all-electric building REACH code. Again, this covers all building types, so single family, multifamily, and non-residential. But there will be an infeasibility waiver for technical infeasibility. And there's still some discussions, and I'm sure City Council will provide a little bit more feedback exactly what's going to be included in the infeasibility waiver, but really meant for technological infeasibility. If there's just not a electric alternative for a type of appliance, this could be for breweries or coffee roasters or something along those lines, where there's just not an electric alternative at this point. like there is for residential and most non-commercial buildings. And I talked a little bit about this, but one of the huge benefits is indoor air quality increases. Buildings represent the vast majority of the NOx emissions in California. It's actually not from power plants, but from our buildings where natural gas is being combusted for our hot water heaters, our stoves. And this has been directly linked to indoor air pollution and asthma. So if we can reduce those emissions, we can help improve health outcomes. All electric buildings are also less expensive to build. So the new building code requires all buildings to be built all electric ready. So by not leaving gas out, we save $5,000 to $8,000 per unit in natural gas plumbing costs. And then we can also save money over the long term. And that's using today's rates. And we're actually expecting to see gas price increases outpace electricity increases over time due to less gas being consumed and less amount of gas having to pay for the same amount of gas infrastructure. So there really is kind of a future-proofing cost effectiveness benefit to going all electric. And then we talked a little bit about this already, but all electric buildings are also key strategies for fighting climate change. Electricity is going to be carbon free by 2045, if not sooner, while natural gas is going to stay has a fixed emission factor. So it's really hard to reduce the emissions associated with natural gas. Moving on to our next ordinance type, we have the expanded solar photovoltaic. This is only going to cover non-residential and multifamily new construction. And that's because the building code already requires single family and low-rise multifamily to install solar as part of the base code. So this is just expanding that requirement to non-residential and large multifamily buildings. And we've gone with an either or and the lesser of approach of 50% electricity consumption modeled by an energy software or 50% of the roof space requirement. And the thought process behind this is that we want to make sure we're not overproducing solar. So say you have a warehouse that has a pretty low electricity demand, but a giant roof. We don't want to cover 50% of it in solar if it's going to be way overproducing, because that's not cost effective and we could have grid impacts. And we also vice versa, if you have a really small roof, you may not be able to put enough solar to offset your 50% of the space. And we still need room for package units and vents and things like that. So the 50-50 rule allows us to kind of best size those systems for the building type and the uses and make sure we're not having any negative grid impacts. When we tie solar PV to buildings, and especially when we add battery storage, which is becoming, pre-wiring is already required in the new code, and the prescriptive baseline building for non-residential actually has battery storage built in. So it's not required, but you do have to kind of compete against that when you're developing your building on an energy efficiency basis. So we're able to increase grid resiliency, make sure that we're adding more renewable to the grid as we're building new buildings. And we also see increased cost savings from electrification when we pair it with solar. And in every building type, the models show that we're able to save money up front still. So we're taking some of that money we saved from not installing natural gas, putting it into a solar PV panel system, and we're able to see both upfront savings and pretty substantial long-term savings as well. So kind of a rare win-win where we're saving money and reducing emissions significantly. And now moving on to our third ordinance, our EV charging ordinance. This is going to affect all building types. We're looking at for 1 or 2 family homes or low-rise multifamily, providing going beyond the level 2 charger that's required by code and adding another level 1 circuit. So that's a slower charging circuit, but it'll allow 2 EVs to be charged at once if there's more than one vehicle per unit. And then in multifamily, going from approximately 20-25% EV ready up to 40%, so almost doubling. That's going to cover multifamily and also hotels. And then if there's more than 20 units, then 15% of that 40% is going to be level 2 EVSE, or which is electric vehicle supply equipment. And that means, so EV ready means panel capacity, conduit, wiring, and a receptacle where you can plug in. And then EVSE is with the EV charger, with the cable, so you can charge your different vehicles. And a nice mix of those so that you can put in the chargers you want, and all the wiring is there. It makes it a lot more straightforward. And then on the non-residential side, we're going to go from about 10% to 20% EV ready as well. So they'll be both charging at home and at offices. Again, some of the benefits here, additional local air quality benefits. When we get rid of gas and diesel powered cars and go to electric, they have 0 local air pollution, which is great. It's also going to decrease emissions from, approximately 50% of Glendale's current greenhouse gas emissions. And as the grid transitions to 100% carbon free, those vehicles will also become carbon free. And this is gonna, the base code for CalGreen is set up to meet California's EV goals through 2025. So by going beyond that, we're making sure that these buildings that are gonna last for, 30, 50 more years, have a good jump on the number of EVs we expect to see in the future without going too far and maybe overshooting the technology, especially if we require different wiring in the future or something like that. So we think this is a really nice sweet spot for making sure there's plenty of charging available as we start to ramp up the number of EV chargers or EVs on the road. How this all kind of couches in with the current state goals is the state of California currently has 2 primary climate bills. In SB 32, which requires a 40% reduction below 1990 levels by 2030, and then carbon neutrality by 2045, and that's with Executive Order B 5518. So again, electrification paired with this carbon-free electricity and increased solar is really the only pathway for buildings and vehicles to move towards carbon neutrality. So this is really setting the foundation for the city as a whole to move in this direction over time. And I talked a little bit about Senate Bill 100, which is the renewable portfolio standard, and requiring 60% of electricity to be from renewable sources by 2030, and then 100% carbon free by 2045. And just recently, Executive Order N7920, CARB made some new rules around that, outlawing the sale of internal combustion engines for passenger vehicles by actually 2035. Sorry, this is a typo. So in just 10 years, or 12 years, I guess, we're looking to see no more internal combustion cars, and there's actually some different steps that we'll have to meet along the way. So we're expecting to see some really significant increases in EVs, and we want to make sure that we're planning for that. Just a little recap on some of the things that Glendale has done so far. It's one of the first cities in Southern California to implement use of recycled water, curbside recycling, plastic bag bans, landfill gas to energy, and green fleet vehicles, bicycle transportation plan, beeline service, green business plan, farmers markets, and more. So really getting an early jump on a lot of these sustainability initiatives. In 2012, going with the Greener Glendale plan, the first iteration of the sustainability plan and the first greenhouse gas inventory. In 2017, becoming a part of the mayor's national climate action agenda. And then adopting these green building standards over time. California and Glendale have really been ratcheting down buildings more and more to become more efficient. And studies show that even though the cost of electricity is high in California, Californians pay one of the smallest percentages of energy costs for buildings. And a lot of that has to do with CALGREEN and these new actions. And in the future, while these reach codes really affect new construction, Glendale will be embarking on their first climate action and adaptation plan shortly later this year. And that's going to provide an opportunity to really dig into more existing buildings and other facets of where emissions come from in the community, and start looking at the impacts of climate change, like heat waves and other extreme weather events that we're already starting to see. So some of the benefits we've kind of been talking through as we go, but this is really the technology around electrification, the way the code is structured. These reach codes are going to make sure that new homeowners, new building developers are going to see substantial savings for all building types. And when paired with solar, also see long-term cost savings on bill for all building types. So there's just good financial decisions being made and good reasons to do this from a financial perspective. And then we also get the benefits of safer and healthier homes, cleaner air, better health outcomes that are tied to these. And more studies are showing, the impacts of indoor air quality and the impacts of combustion indoors and some of the negative things associated with that. And then throughout this, we've been working with Glendale Water and Power, thinking about the grid impacts of these things. And we think the package of codes that we have here are both, getting us set up to do that and moving towards all electric without having substantial grid impacts that are going to be negative that we'll have to kind of work on over time. So at this point, we want to, provide the survey link for you to go over and take a look and provide some of your feedback there. But we also want to open up the chat so that we can answer some of your questions live on the phone. And we also have, the city also has their website set up at bit.ly/Glendale Renewable Electrification. Glendale Electrification, and that will get you to more information, link to other studies, tons more information, cost effectiveness studies, all of that. And then we also have some links here to building electrification information. We've got local energy codes, has a lot of examples. Energy Code ACE and Building Decarb both have a lot of information, and then the CDC website as well. So yeah, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so we can see the chat.
That was excellent, Ryan. Thank you very much for that. And as Ryan mentioned, the word reach code, we do feel this is a real reach beyond the base code for the city. And it's a great start for the city to, as I mentioned earlier, to delve into actions required to decarbonize our city. And we think this is a really good beginning and sets a stage forward for the city of Glendale. So really appreciate that, Ryan. Thank you.
Yep. And we've dropped the link to the survey in the chat as well as the link to the city website, so you didn't have to memorize the one we had on the screen for a minute. So go ahead and click over there and provide any feedback, and we're going to be taking all those comments to city council as well, and it's a good way to get your voice out there. Kate asked if we could take questions orally, but we're just not set up to do that tonight. I apologize. I know it's a little awkward to ask through the chat, but we're kind of stuck with that for the minute.
Hi, Kate. If you wouldn't mind just putting your question in the chat, that'd be great.
And if you're finding difficulty accessing the chat, it's down at the bottom. If you hover over the bottom of the page, it'll come up and you can link to it.
Yeah, and Drew asked if just to confirm that if there are exemptions, except for the invisibility waiver. And Drew, to answer your question, at this time we have no exemptions. We're going to be bringing that suggestion to City Council, and it'll be up to them to kind of chew on what we bring them and make a decision. But right now the plan is no exemptions with an infeasibility waiver. And there are several cities who have gone that route and it seems to be working pretty well. Kate, yeah, I know, hard to type, but for multifamily greater than 20 units, it's 40% EV ready, and 15% of those are going to be EV ready with the EVSE equipment. So it's not going to be 55%, it'll still be 40%. There may be some limit on how many of those 15 are able to offset the 40, but it'll be around 40% either way. And Kate also asked, did we study the grid impacts of increasing the EV charging reach code? Can you estimate the impact of the reach code if the reach code adopts the level of electrification recommended by the Sustainability Commission? Yeah, we definitely looked into and are continuing to look into grid impacts. You know, as you're adding level 2 EV chargers, especially like faster versions, you're adding, you know, 6, 10 or more kilowatts per charger. And there are definitely, it's really location dependent. So some locations can handle higher EV charging, some cannot. A lot of it has to do with the service as well and the level of service that is going to the building. So there's just a lot of questions about what a world will look like with 100% EV charging. And if we have a lot of cars with a lot of a lot of range, big batteries, all trying to charge at the exact same time at a big parking lot, there's potential to be kind of significant impacts. So we think that as is, this code kind of provides, you know, double what the state is expecting through 2025. And as we kind of get closer and start hitting these higher percentages of EVs, I think it'll become a lot more clear what the impacts are, and we can continue to grow and build bigger codes if necessary. Or, you know, we may find that there's a new technology or a new load sharing device or something that can help us balance some of these things. But I think either way, the research we're seeing is like, once you start getting past 20, 30% EVs, there's going to need to be substantial grid upgrades, which we know we're going to have to make eventually, but I think is a question of when and how is still being sussed out.
I'd like to point out that this is an entry point into a larger climate planning program that the city is kicking off. So this is the initial foray into this effort that was developed hand in hand with Glendale Water and Power, taking into consideration their concerns about grid impacts. And with this reach code, we moved the ball along significantly beyond the existing requirements of Title 24, and also open up the door to start doing the level of analysis that would be required prior to initiating greater adoption of EV infrastructure. So it's not an endpoint by any means. We're literally starting the process to continue the analysis, continuing the the outreach with the community to identify what the needs are and how to proceed best possible.
And then Kathy Berlin asked if there was any effort to coordinate this with the power source in Glendale. I don't know the current status, but Glendale is considering building new gas plants. Not really. I know the city knows that's going on. Burbank Water and Power knows it's going on. I think the issue with EV charging and specifically EV charging is not how much electricity there is. It's like how much you need to deliver to a specific place at one time. And that's the part that's tricky. And capacity wise, there's less issue, I think. So once we start getting into existing buildings and things like that, I think there's going to be a greater coordination with that, like total demand. We're also expecting new construction of electric buildings to actually help reduce some of the demand at peak times. So that'll help alleviate some of the stress, but EVs definitely add to the stress, and will continue to in a growing capacity over time. Drew asks why we're proposing a solar reach code when solar and storage is prescriptively required for multifamily and non-residential. Will the 50% roof area or 50% load be incrementally better? That's a great question. The reason we're doing that is because like 90% of buildings get built on a performance standard. So it's increasingly more difficult for them to beat the prescriptive building, which they have to, going the performance route, but they still could. So this is just making sure that new buildings have solar where it's not guaranteed under the code, it's just encouraged. Because you don't have to build to the prescriptive standards. You can do a performance-based approach, which is how most people do it, and they could gain that energy efficiency, somewhere else with better insulation or windows or something, and miss out on some of that solar generation. Kate followed up on Drew's question about exemptions. What are the arguments against including exemptions? That is a great question. So, one of the issues that we are seeing is, and not just us, but there's a lot of research on this from the state pathways report, GridWorks report. You can do some more reading on that. I think we have those linked on the website in places. But the way that natural gas infrastructure gets paid for is it gets subsidized up front. So if you're a developer, you get a bunch of natural gas infrastructure installed for very low cost. And then the cost of that infrastructure gets shared among all of the gas ratepayers. So each therm of natural gas that you buy from the utility, most of that cost, like 70% of it, goes to paying for the infrastructure that got the gas to your house. So as the amount of gas goes down that we're using because of efficiency or electrification, the fixed infrastructure stays the same or expands. And that's going to cause the cost of gas to increase exponentially. So some of the estimates that we're seeing from these big statewide utility studies are, 500, 600% increases in gas over the next, 50 years or something. So when we start adding exemptions, whether it's for a whole building type, but most likely for a specific end use, we are putting that infrastructure in the ground, spending all of that money to do so, and then burning a very small amount of gas, or a smaller amount of gas. So it's just a really inefficient way to do it. So the more we can limit that, we can limit these price increases, and we can make sure that we're getting carbon neutral buildings where if you're running all that gas, you can't.
Yeah, and I would just add to the secondary part of that comment that there's state law out there, SB 100, that is moving towards carbon neutrality. So it's in place, it's a state law, everyone has to go there, but it's over the extended time frame that's established by the law to get there.
Kathy Berlin noted that if you remove the gas from the buildings, but continue to use it as the power source for the electricity, it seems you're defeating the purpose and the goal. And that's another great question. Couple pieces here. In general, on like, take it from an air quality perspective, a central natural gas fired power plant has probably hundreds of air quality sensors embedded in that stack, and they're constantly fine-tuning that process to reduce emissions and to burn as efficiently as possible. So you get really efficient power plants, really efficient energy harvesting off of the turbines. So that central generation and then having it spread out through electrification is actually more efficient and emissions are lower. So, and you're able to mix with renewable, right? But if you're piping into everyone's individual home, you're spending more. You never are going to be able to get all of that gas to be carbon free. There looks to be about 34% or so of the state's 34% of the state's current natural gas demand could likely be met with renewable gas or hydrogen. So in the future, power plants, these larger point sources could be potentially run on some kind of biofuel, but it's not cost effective to run every individual building on those biofuels. So there could be benefits to having like the power plant, a peaker plant, provide biofuel if we have low renewables or a high heat day or something like that as that backup power. So we can still look at a decarbonized future with that power plant that runs on gas, but not necessarily if that gas has to go to every individual home. So there's still benefits. It's better if every house runs on 100% renewable, but in the short term, you still get really good emissions reductions. And in the long term, you're still able to get to zero, where with gas in every home, you're not. And Kate seemed glad to see that makes sense. Sometimes it's kind of complicated to get through, but yeah, a lot of thought has definitely gone into this, both by Rincon and the city, but also at the state level. And I think you're starting to see that in the state's building codes, and the reasons they're going this direction is because it pencils out really well. And a really large statewide study was done on the most cost-effective way to reach carbon neutrality. It's called the Pathways Report, and they found very clearly that electrification of a vast majority of the building stock was really the way to do that. So this new building reach code is the first step in that direction to really let's stop installing infrastructure we know we don't want in the future, and then we can start thinking about the rest of it as we move forward. Kate asked for the PV requirement, would a higher number than 50% also work to ensure a lack of grid impacts? My question is, what are the grid impacts of offsetting 75% of usage? It's a great question. There's definitely a range of numbers that we could go with. We really wanted to be careful that we were not oversizing. Net energy metering 3.0 is going to be the new law of the land soon. And it's going to substantially reduce the benefit of having oversized solar. So we want to make sure that we are, because Glendale Water and Power. That's a great point. Thank you for the update. Yeah, I think there's still, that's the overproduction is what we're hedging against. And also we want to manage the cost. We don't want to make it like so overly costly to build a new building, but we want to make sure we're getting the benefits, and that's kind of the number we landed on that felt like it was a safe place to be.
So yeah, if I just may interrupt there too, we have to start at some point, and we think that the 50% is a really good starting point for us. We will have the opportunity, as Eric said, through the climate action and adaptation planning process, to revisit those and maybe increase those percentages to 75% or to whatever. But we feel as the city of Glendale gets used to implementing these building electrification reach codes, as we get staff up to speed on looking at the planning and improving the plans, get GWP comfortable, we think that the 50% is a very good starting place for us, and we do feel that represents a reach over the base code too.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how, especially with the new code, how cost effective it is to build all electric, and the numbers we're seeing coming in for the new 2022 code are looking really good. Thanks, Drew. That's great news.
Yeah, I think that that can be said about a lot of communities in California. This is something that has made financial sense, makes sense for climate policy, and for the health and betterment of communities. So I think we're going to be seeing communities doing this. We've seen over 45, 50 communities already adopt similar codes. So this is a rising trend.
Kate asked if we can speak to the benefits of commercial kitchens of switching to electric. Yeah, I think this is one of those spaces that was probably the last one to move towards all electric, maybe the most concern. But we are seeing restaurants move in this direction, especially when there's space constraints. So if you have a smaller space, the induction cooking takes up less space and you need less ventilation because you're not combusting a fossil fuel there. There's also less heat impacts. The equipment stays cooler, and you can move stuff around because it's not tied into anything. So you can just plug in. If you have multiple plugs, you can move your workstations around, depending on how you want to orient your workflow. So if you're making new things or different things, there's a lot of options there. Yeah, so it's definitely different. And I think at first, a lot of people were worried about it. The more people actually use them, the better it is. And there's still some types of commercial kitchens that have, certain uses that are harder to electrify, but there's a lot that are really easy. And I think there'll be some that move that direction faster and others that are a little slower, but it seems to be heading in that direction with new types of technologies coming out. Yeah, noisy, a lot of ventilation, fans, and I don't know, I have some friends who are chefs and restaurant workers, and it's just kind of hot and miserable to work next to a giant gas stove all day. I washed dishes for a long time. It was behind the stove. I remember it was pretty terrible. So I think it makes it a little bit more pleasant to be in the kitchen when everything's induction. Backyard barbecues are totally fine. I think using a propane tank is the way to go. We're not gonna be piping in natural gas just for the grill, but yeah, using a propane tank is a really great kind of interim measure. We're even using portable fossil fuel tanks for labs that need to do sterilization. They can have a small tank for that. Chefs who need to char peppers and they don't feel like they can do that, they can use a butane torch. There's a lot of options just like that where you can do that little thing you really want to do with gas without having to pipe in all that super expensive infrastructure.
I think there's new like electric barbecues too out there, I believe, on the market.
Yeah, the Traeger is a really great grill. It uses a wood pellet and electric, and you can smoke stuff. It's pretty sweet. A little pricey, but really sweet. These are great questions. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think, okay, there's a couple options there. I mean, induction grills and griddles get really hot. You can definitely sear meat on those just as well as you can in a pan that's being heated by gas. That's totally fine. And if you really want that like charred thing, you can use like a separate small tank to power that.
And it doesn't take away someone's ability to use charcoal or wood to grill meats. So there's not really any implication for limiting restaurants' ability to cook the type of food that they want.
Yeah. Yeah, people found a way to grill meat before natural gas was pumped into their homes. So I think we'll be able to figure it out.
Is what gave rise to our brains, right? When they figured out how to cook meat.
Yeah.
We do encourage people to fill out the survey, and please put your thoughts on there too if you haven't done so. And we encourage you to please share the city's website with the survey on, and it has all the information regarding this. The previous webinar has been recorded, and that's on the city website. So yeah, please use that, go to that. And if you have any suggestions about the website, please email Elizabeth Harris or myself.
David, this might be a question for you, but Kate asked if there is any previous requirement for Glendale restaurants to have been required to switch to gas from charcoal in the past.
Unfortunately, I do not have an answer to that, Kate, but I'll do some research and find out for you.
Yeah, there's definitely some indoor air quality issues about using charcoal inside to cook meat. I think, most restaurants that are, making a steak, they're like slow cooking that and then searing it on a pan to get the char marks, and they'd be able to do that same thing with induction stove and like I have a cast iron and an induction stove, and I can, sear meats and things like that.
There's that French method of cooking, right? Where you
like
vacuum it and then sous vide. There you go.
As we transition into a cooking show.
Yeah. Okay, we appreciate the questions. And the typing. Apologize.
So we've got about 8 minutes left. So please, if you do have any questions, any thoughts, just please jot them down in the chat.
Yeah, so infrastructure costs are actually, Kate asked about natural gas prices, not just the infrastructure costs, but the fuel costs. And that's actually what I was referencing when I'm talking about these large increases that we're expecting. That's for the fuel costs. The infrastructure costs, costs of everything are going up. I'm sure infrastructure costs will go up in some amount, but it's really the fuel costs that we're expecting to increase as fewer therms of gas have to pay for the same amount of infrastructure. So the price per therm is going to increase. And we've already seen some evidence of that with the when the utilities are going to the CPUC to ask for rate increases, the natural gas rate increases have been higher already than the electricity rate increases. And eventually the cost of gas, which is currently cheaper, will go past the cost of electricity. Yeah, so I mean, there's a rate escalation that the utilities are allowed to ask for, and that is governed by the CPUC. So there's always increases in prices. It's just the way of the world, I guess. But and we'll see increases in electricity prices continue most likely. But the thought is that the rate of increase is going to be higher for gas because of this decrease in consumption.
But it is regulated by the CPUC and it's yet to be fully detailed. The real thing that we can point to is who bears the weight of the cost of infrastructure if less people utilize it. So that's why we point to that. Other increases would be subject to CPUC decisions.
Kate asks about gas market prices. And yeah, well, I guess what we're saying is every year the gas utility and the electricity utility, they make a case to the CPUC that we need to increase the rates by whatever percentage because infrastructure costs, because inflation, because gas market rates. So all of those things can affect the rate increase they ask for. And then the CPUC says, yeah, that makes sense, or no, you're just trying to pad your pockets, so you have to only go a certain amount. Michael asks, I think the expansion of LNG exports could lead to higher domestic gas prices. I agree. I think that's definitely potential, right? Like a worldwide market. There's a lot of demand in Europe, especially right now. It's kind of interesting. As an aside, just the amount of money that we spend on fossil fuel speculation is absolutely insane, like billions of dollars. So renewable electricity that's developed here that doesn't have that is pretty amazing. But that's an aside.
For the contractor community, what we did hold an event today to speak with professionals to hear their concerns, so that we could also understand what the implications of a reach code would be for them. We have had this open engagement opportunity to get more feedback. And we will continue to have conversations as additional reach codes or policies are developed. The goal is to fully understand the impacts and also to set up, and David, you can corroborate this, the plan is not just to develop reach codes and then leave everyone to their own devices. It's to provide the support for the fair and equitable adoption of these policies and to make sure that professionals know what to do and have access to resources to be able to work within the paradigms established by the reach codes.
Eric, thank you very much for giving that point, and that's very important. Yes, where we feel and where we feel that there is a need for support from the city for education sessions and everything, we'll provide that support to those medium to mid-sized contractors or even large contractors. So yes, we're not going to, as Eric said, we're not going to put the reach code out there and then let everybody like try to figure it out. We're going to be a support mechanism for those businesses.
I think the other good thing to remember as well is that the base code already requires buildings to be all electric ready and requires heat pump installation in most buildings. So this is something that's going to come down the line to contractors anyway. It's not really causing them any additional impact. But there is going to be a learning curve, and that's, I think, where the things that David's talking about really come into play.
Yeah, and Kate, when we're speaking about gas, we're speaking from a pretty narrow perspective. There's a lot going on with different utilities. There's different things that can come up between different months that we're not necessarily privy to. So I don't want to get too much into detail about what pressures are leading to your costs. But from a big picture macroeconomic perspective, we were trying to point to the forces that could cause for the change that's being projected.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for taking time. Oh, one more question from Kate.
Yeah.
This is your last question, Kate.
The code requirements are for non-residential, they are required for the prescriptive approach. I don't recall how much storage is required. And I believe that the prescriptive requirement for residential is also battery storage. So that doesn't mean that it's required all the time, because buildings can also go on the performance approach. And if they do performance approach, they could maybe do other things besides battery storage. But this is definitely pushing us towards batteries in buildings pretty substantially compared to the old code.
Thank you, Ryan. Both Ryan and Eric, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to respond to the questions, and great questions from our community. So we really do appreciate them. I encourage you all to listen in to the City Council meeting on December 13th too. But yeah, thank you very much for taking this time out of your day to give us your thoughts. And please, as I said, complete the survey and let your friends and colleagues, everything, know the survey's out there. The more information we have, the better it is for us to take that information to City Council. So
thanks for your time, everybody. Really appreciate that.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.